Getting hurt at the gym is your fault, and it's not because of your technique. Let me tell you why. If you're going to the gym, really all you need to do to make progress is be consistent and stay healthy, but staying healthy can be a real challenge. I'm here today to tell you about how to prevent injury while you're training, and better yet, explain why you get injured while you're training. There's a lot of misinformation out there and people who just don't understand exactly what they're talking about. Hopefully this isn't nefarious, but let me provide some clarity. When you get hurt, there are two reasons. Either you've demanded something of a tissue that it's not prepared for, or you haven't let a tissue recover, so it's decreasing its capacity, and inevitably you're going to get hurt. That's the more chronic model, and the aforementioned is the more acute model. Regardless, you're asking something of a tissue in your body that it's not prepared for. What a lot of people will say when someone gets injured is they'll talk about the technique, and the technique X, Y, and Z happened, and this is why I got hurt. Let's say your knees cave on a squat. Now I have hip pain. Well, that's greater trochanteric bursitis because your knee went into valgus while you were squatting, et cetera, et cetera. Is this wrong? Yeah. For the vast majority of people, it is wrong. If you go to a medical professional of any sort and they ask you first to see the technique of the lift that you were doing, that is not appropriate. It's only appropriate in one circumstance, and that circumstance is if you got hurt following a well-structured program, and then only on the top set did you feel anything, and all of a sudden you got hurt. Then it might be useful to look at a video. Why? Well, if we think in a local sense, muscles locally, joints locally are exposed to forces. We don't just put 300 kilos on a barbell, squat it, and say we've exposed our body to 300 kilos. Depending on how you move, it's going to create a different moment arm with that load to then cause your injury. If your technique changes dramatically, you're going to have one joint or one muscle take more load than it's ever been used to. So in essence, you've programmed, quote unquote, yourself to get injured. Now, the vast majority of people get hurt because the program itself is the problem, not because of a technical error. Of course, I'm not talking about complete novice gym goers. There are ways in which the body should be loaded and ways in which the body is not meant to be loaded as heavy. But the vast majority of people are getting hurt because of their program. Why do I say this? Well, your body is conditioned to continue to do the things that you've prepared it to do, whether that be running or lifting or whatever. Nothing is inherently bad for you. Now, people who tell me that I lift weights and aren't you worried about lifting such heavy weights? Well, not really, because I've prepared myself for it. But would I be worried about going for a 5-kilometer run? Absolutely. I'd rupture an Achilles, my calves would cramp up, I'd probably tear a hamstring. But a 5K run isn't inherently bad for you or unhealthy either. So how can we structure our training so that we don't expose ourselves to higher injury risk than necessary? Now, I will say, going to the gym and lifting weights has a lower injury risk than virtually every other sport you can think of when we talk about participation hours. It is inherently a very safe thing to do. No one else is perturbing your movement. You don't have to work with anything unpredictable. It's just you and weight that's only impacted by gravity. Now, the program itself, we got to talk volume, intensity, and load. Volumes to most people should not change over time. Now, this could be 5 heavy working sets. It could be 25 working sets. And what people don't realize oftentimes is that you have to do less working sets the stronger you get. You have to do less total workouts the stronger you get. The reason for that is your nervous system is adapting, and really it's not adapting as fast as your muscles or your tendons. So you might be muscularly ready to do more, but your nervous system just isn't firing. There's 3 signs to tell if your nervous system isn't firing well. It's if you're irritable during the day, which only your wife or husband can tell you. It's if you are not sleeping well at night and you're fatigued during the day, and if your appetite changes. Traditionally, people who tend to gain weight will gain weight. People who tend to lose weight will forget to eat. If sympathetic fatigue is taken into account, this is the foundation of training to not cause yourself to get hurt when it comes to heavy strength training. So let's say we do a heavy strength training block. We're all good. There's no problems, and you're all done that. You do a deload, which is another thing that most people do not do. Every 4 to 6 weeks, you must deload. After that deload, let's say you'd like to go into a muscular endurance or hypertrophy block. So we're going to go from relatively low volume, very intense, very high load, to relatively high volume with lower load and really higher intensity. Bodybuilding requires a higher intensity than strength training. I've had conversations with Dr. Mike Israetel about this. If you want to check those out, we'll go ahead and pop those up at the end of the video. But you cannot assume that since you are lifting and you're going to the gym and you're training, and I squatted in my heavy sessions, I squatted singles, doubles, triples. Now I'm fit and ready to squat sets of 12 to 15. Anyone who's done that knows that your hamstrings, your glutes, your quads are going to start getting that burning, cramping, fire feeling. And this is not good. If you're burning and cramping, well, imagine that under load. You go under load, a muscle cramps, it's trying to lengthen. This is when a tear is very likely. So what do we do? Well, first of all, we got to monitor our progression with all of volume, intensity, and load. And you should not change that less than 2% a week, because we always want to be moving forward, but no more than 5% a week in normal circumstances where you're not recovering from injury. This is going to ensure that you continue moving forward, but not so much to the extent that you put yourself at risk. I get it all the time. I increased 5%. It just felt so easy, so I wanted to do more, so I did more. Inherently, there's no problem with that 9 times out of 10, but 1 time out of 10, you're going to run into an issue with your tendons. And tendons and soft tissues, as in non-contractile tissues, have substantially less blood supply than contractile tissues, meaning that their rate of adaptation is much slower. Your muscles might feel ready, the weight might feel like you're capable of it, but your tendons and your ligaments are not prepared. And this is where you're doing something pretty rudimentary, pretty simple for you, something that moves well, and all of a sudden, something's popped. Now, that 2 to 5% exists forever up until your deload. It exists for 4 to 6 weeks at a time until your deload. In your deload, my recommendation is to cut sets in half and cut intensity to 75%, or load to 75% of what it was in your final week of your block. When you then transition, you can only transition one trainable quality at a time. You can go from strength to power, from power to hypertrophy, from hypertrophy to muscular endurance. If you're trying to go from strength to muscular endurance, we're jumping 2 trainable qualities, meaning that we're going to need one sort of bridge couple of weeks to be able to prepare you for muscular endurance, so that your body will actually adapt in a positive way. That would look like 4 to 6 weeks of heavy strength training, pivoting into 2 weeks of power, pivoting into your muscular endurance, or your strength training block, 2 weeks of hypertrophy work, and then into your muscular endurance, 4 to 6 week block. On top of this, we don't want to run our bodies into the ground. It depends highly on how experienced you are, your training age, your chronological age, how close you are to your genetic potential, but everyone's going to hit a limit where you can't do 7 strength blocks in a row and just expect yourself to continue to improve to eons. If you could do that, there's no chance that you'd be listening to me. You would just be competing with me. As a general guideline, I say experienced lifters can go 3 blocks with one quality and continue to improve. This is someone like myself. Intermediate lifters could probably go 4 blocks and continue to improve. And novice lifters can go anywhere from 6 to 8 blocks and continue to improve. This would equate, if we think of 7 blocks, 7 times, we'll call them 5-week blocks, is 35 weeks. This is about 7 months. Well, if you're a novice powerlifter and you focus on strength for 7 months at a time, what would you expect the results to be? Well, they'd be pretty damn good. The weight wouldn't be hugely close to your genetic potential because you're just new to training, meaning that your tendons are probably going to be okay. Your nervous system is definitely going to be okay. And this is really the foundation of injury and preventing injury. You should first look at a well-structured program, and then you should look at technique as a distant second. The notion that X muscle isn't firing or X movement is inherently bad, they're just simply incorrect. Let's say something like back pain. Well, let me backtrack. Let's talk about running pain, knee pain in runners, because this is a really easy direct parallel. Runners tend to have more knee pain than the average person, but the literature suggests that they actually have more knee pain, not because their knees are in worse condition, but because they demand so much more of their knees, something that the average person would never know that they would have knee pain if they ran 10 miles a day, but a runner would experience that for sure. When it comes to lifting, if you are someone who lifts every single day And we're talking about your low back. Well, the vast majority of people have low back pain, generally speaking, at some point in their life. I forget the exact statistic, but it's something like 75 to 90% of people will experience non-specific lower back pain, aka it has no diagnosis, it has no real treatment plan. It's just continues to get better, move and hope for the best. And move is really the only thing that you can do. But if 75 to 90% of general population have back pain, what are the odds that someone who's deadlifting is going to have back pain? Well, of course, that's very high. You're exposing your back to more load, and it's simple as that. Can you load in flexion? Yes, you can load in flexion if you train yourself up to that. And this would be my last point. Technique is relative to an individual. If you're someone who traditionally lifts with a more rounded back, you should be learning proper bracing mechanics for sure. But outside of that, you can continue to progress yourself just the same as someone who lifts with a dead straight back. The issue is going to arise in efficiency, not in injury. You're going to be inefficient trying to lock the weight out. But if you're braced into a flexed spine, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. If you're braced and when you go to lift, your spine becomes more flexed, that becomes a real problem. Why? Well, our spine is meant to be loaded straight up and down, as are our knees, as are our shoulders, as are every other joint in the body. We like compression. We don't like what's called shear forces. And if we have two vertebrae and you pinch one side, you can imagine that there's going to be a force back out the backside. And this is how disc herniations, disc bulges, slip disc, etc. That's how they happen. But they only happen when you rely on the tissue. There's 3 layers of protection when it comes to your back. We first have our core bracing. We second have our spinal erectors and muscles of the core. And third, we have our soft tissues, and this is when we run into problems. I could repeat this logic over and over with your ACL, with your patellar tendons, with your rotator cuff, but that's all for another video. Let me know what you guys would like to learn about when it comes to injury and recovery. This is my background. This is what I do. And this is my secret weapon, if you want to call it that, to be the most consistent strongman in recent history. Thank you very much for watching, guys. As per usual, lift heavy, be kind, and we will catch you tomorrow.